Hello, welcome to ACI Learning's Project Management webinar series. You are here for project management and AI and trying to actually see how everything combines together and the impact that AI will have on project management today. I'm Ronnie Wong. I am filling in for Mr. Chris Ward as we actually are continuing on in this series. We'll also, of course, be bringing in our subject matter expert, which is going to be Robin Abernathy. Robin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ronnie. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to discuss this topic.
All right. So when we start thinking about this, right, it was inevitable for everything to happen in terms of AI, right? So we've seen where ChatGPT has essentially influenced the entire world. We've taken every aspect of our lives and we've kind of run it through. It was inevitable, wasn't it, that project management would also get impacted at some point in time. And so we're actually going to take a look at that as well as we actually get started here. So when we start talking about, we've got a few things on our mind as we move forward here. So part of our agenda today is going to, of course, just be covering what in the world is going to be Gen AI or generative AI, and also, of course, taking a look at the most popular way that we tend to see the usage of AI, which is going to be ChatGPT, and also the idea of large language models. We're going to be focusing in on some documentation and project management, and then also possibly see some of the results of the way that we use this to help us in project management as well. And of course, the ever popular Q&A at the end of our particular episode here as we move forward. So when it begins and we start to take a look here, let's go ahead and take a look at this idea of generative AI. Now, before we get started with everything here on the screen, Robin, I want to go ahead and just kind of ask you right away. When you first started hearing about the idea of generative AI itself, okay, what was your initial reaction as you thought about it, let's say from the standpoint of a project manager?
Well, when I thought about it, initially I didn't think of it from the side of a project manager. And I think we've all seen the movies where AI takes over the world. So initially, I think, as with anybody, there was a little bit of fear. And there was, because there was so much unknown. And now, as I've delved into it and I've used that project manager of mind, I realized that it is a way to improve my productivity, making me a better project manager so that I don't have to waste as much time on the little things. I can focus more on the big things. I can get AI to help me to do some of the intro steps. And then I take whatever AI gives me and I refine it and make it better. And I think anybody wants to be able to do their job more efficiently and provide a better product or end result to whatever their consumer is.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point is actually putting in context of what we're doing. Initially, most of us probably never thought about in the context of anything that we were doing initially. But once we started to actually see people using it, we probably started getting curious about it. And that's how I also began as well. But let's talk about this idea of generative AI for a moment as we define it as well, because we all have our preconceptions about what this actually means. So when we start talking about the idea of generative AI, the first term that we actually will come to a lot of times is people just mean GPT, right? Which stands for generative pre-trained, pre-trained. That's what it actually stands for. AI is the idea of Chat GPT here, and they're using the term chat, which means, of course, that you're going to interact with it in some type of chat here. So the most popular one out there is what's called Transformer, which is what Chat GPT is based off of, which is that type of AI that we're taking a look at now. The other thing behind the idea of generative AI is that it's based on neural networks, which I don't seem to be able to say. Now, when it comes down to this idea of neural networks and what they're talking about, right, is that they are trying to use what they believe as a model of learning that's actually really based on the human brain. In that sense, it is designed with that idea in mind. Now, they're not designing exactly in the same way, but they're designing it trying to make that idea think in the same way that humans would actually think to be able to do so. Now, when we start to also dive into it, the other terminology that will begin to kind of get us a little bit more is this idea of what they call a large language model. And it's defined here as something that actually analyzes structures, relationships, and patterns of large training data. Now, for us, what that means is it can consume a massive amount of data, and allow us to use the language that it actually finds behind it. And the term generative that's behind it is that it can actually amass that information. It can take a look at it and analyze it like it's talking about, take a look at the structure and the way that language is actually used and the relationship it sees between these words and these patterns that we actually end up seeing, and then generate something that is going to be either brand new or something in the way that we actually want it to generate. And that's really that whole goal behind generative AI to help us out. When we start taking a look at the idea of outputs, right, this can include something like text. We simply ask a question and then it can generate an answer back for us. We can even have it at some points generate some type of graphics or audio or videos, music, even computer code, you name it. We're actually seeing this more and more and more about what it is that we could actually end up doing. So, Robin, as your experience came about, even from that project manager standpoint, and us taking a look at this overall, so when you first started hearing about its abilities, right, and saying, can it really do the stuff that it can do? Did you then, are you now able to see a little bit more about where in the world you can actually take a project even beyond just simply saying, what is a project? What do we actually need here? Could you actually start seeing that once you understood the power of this generative AI?
Well, the thing you need to keep in mind with any AI is it's only as up to date as its last, I guess you could say, upload. And some of them do have some restrictions. I went into one and was asking about where we train on certification, and there's some new additions of some certifications coming out. So I asked it about these new additions, and ChatGPT in particular promptly returned to me and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I don't even know that that thing exists because it's not, I'm up to date as of about 2 years ago." So I had to start from scratch for that particular topic and teach it everything. Like, this is how the topics are categorized, and then this is how the hierarchy of them works. So while you can generate a lot of different things from it, it may not be as up to date as you need it. And so, therefore, it is up to you to train it. And you also, yeah, I don't know if many of you have heard of the term of zero trust. And I tell everybody it's not trust, then verify, it's verify, then trust. Any output it gives you, particularly if you're having it to generate something technical in nature or that is you're providing a report, you want to read through everything that it says. You can even correct it and have it change what it says. But the thing you need to keep in mind is it's a teaching model. I can teach it and impart knowledge on it and get the results back that I need.
Yeah, with the results that it's actually doing, right? It's kind of amazing. I don't know if you've seen this, Robin, where it actually generated results that were more complete than even what I was actually thinking about. Has that been surprising to you?
It was surprising to me in that oftentimes when I would be prompting it and asking it a question, I was expecting it to go like in directions one, two, and three.
Mhm.
And somehow it also got these a couple of others over here, and I was going, oh, I didn't even think about that. In our human brain, I think sometimes we see things the way we see it. And that's why we like teamwork, because a lot of times you bring a new team member in and they see something a little bit differently than you do. Well, AI kind of sees it all if it's in their database, I guess you could say. And so for me, that model that's sitting behind there doesn't have that forgetfulness factor that I may have had. So, yeah, those are two valid points that should have been included in this discussion that I didn't even think of. My outline that I may have produced was incomplete. But then AI was able to go in there and go, yeah, there's 2 points here that I think you also need to make. So, yeah, that's definitely a great point you made there, Ronnie.
Yeah, another aspect that I also found surprising about the way that the AI ends up working is what you had mentioned, which is that you have to teach it some of the things. There were sometimes answers that it threw out that were surprisingly wrong and actually misleading at times. And it was because it may not have had the full context. Have you experienced that too?
Most definitely. The thing that I started finding is, and as you're teaching it, you may teach it something and then it goes and generates content later that speaks on something that you may have taught it, but it reverted back to the wrong information. That's something that you're going to have to watch for, and you're going to have to be a little patient. We laugh in some of my team calls when I talk about my conversations with ChatGPT, that sometimes I get a little testy and that I correct it in a little, rather abrupt manner. ChatGPT will reply, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I got that wrong. Let me fix that for you." But yeah, not everything you're going to get out of it is going to be 100% accurate. And you've got to make sure that you're feeding it the right thing. If you feed it a wrong point and it sticks that, whatever that fact is that you gave it that's wrong, it's going to keep regurgitating that back to you, and it's wrong. So, like I said, you verify and then you trust the AI. The thing that I will note here is if you're getting wrong information back, you're better off to go ahead and correct it as quickly as you can. Don't go a couple of more transactions down and then try to hop back to a earlier post and say, "Hey, up there you got this wrong." Correct it as early as possible so you can keep the AI headed in the right direction.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the farther that you get along and that you're actually doing some of those things that Robin is talking about, essentially what everybody talked about training, the way that ChatGPT or the generative AI is working, you do want to try and correct that as soon as you can. If not, it's going to continue to build off of whatever information that you let it continue on with, thinking it's right. So it is kind of one of those situations that's a little bit sticky and it requires human validation or verification that all the stuff that you generate from this is correct. Because if you don't, right, you could end up producing something that you don't want to. And Robin, as far as I know, in terms of project managers, we really want to make sure that everything that we put down, right, that we generate is going to be something that is accurate and correct rather than something that's just been produced out there. It may look correct as you read, let's just say, a couple of paragraphs, but you may find out somewhere in it the logic did get flawed because of something that was introduced in it earlier.
Well, and when in relation to project management, the AI may not fully understand all of the aspects of the project. So you may go in there and ask it for something and it not quite get one area correct. Maybe it doesn't understand all of the risks involved in your project, or maybe it's defined some team member roles incorrectly, and that you're going to want a little bit more of a granular team member roles. You're going to divide some of those tasks. And that's where your human knowledge and experience is going to come in. Because remember, the AI does have all this wonderful information sitting there for you to use, but he doesn't really have that experience factor. AI hasn't really managed a project.
Yeah.
You have. So you're going to have to go in there and kind of tweak what the output that you're going to be getting.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the more frustrating parts about working with something like a generative AI at the beginning is that you don't know how to get it started. So you tend to ask a bunch of general questions, and then you start realizing I need to figure out how I can refocus those questions that you're getting at least an answer that you know that's right at the beginning, and then you now have a pattern that you can follow to start asking that. Now, Robin, just because we've talked about the idea of generative AI here, it really is kind of part of the solution that can also, of course, be for project managers as well. The other part is that once you understand a little bit more about generative AI, as we've been talking about, and some of the different things that it can generate for you, that's really right. The amount of stuff it can generate, which could be really voluminous. The also some of the little pitfalls that we have here. We now have to actually understand like the idea of interacting with generative AI. Now, this is no secret anymore. At one time, when somebody did say, AI, essentially what you saw in the movies, right, was some type of feature that would give you what you thought was going to happen. But at the beginning, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like you could just talk to it and it would give you an answer that you were expecting. Sometimes it required you to actually answer or ask a question in a particular way that it understood. And then you could, then you might get an output that was fairly similar. But we all now know that what ends up happening today is this idea of, well, Chat GPT. This is by far the most popular way that we actually interact with any type of generative AI right now, all over the world, whether you're actually in project management or not. And it's because it's just out there on the internet itself. And so anybody can go there and ask a question. That's what we actually have as well. So in this sense, right? When we start to do it, uh, I want to talk just briefly here, and I'm going to bring Robin into the discussion as well, too, which is that when I first learned about the idea of using ChatGPT, it wasn't anything having to do with project management. It was actually just me being curious about what it could actually answer, and then trying to see if I could, see what the output would be. And then I started interacting with the responses it gave me too. So, Robin, when it comes down to now moving from the general topic of just a generative AI and what it can produce, right? We want to get into this realm of Chat GPT. How natural did it feel for you to actually start to use something like Chat GPT to begin to work with some things that you're doing?
Well, initially, I will say I was a little bit nervous because I didn't even know, how do I even ask it a question? How do I even talk to this being on the other end of this digital interface that I have? And so, oftentimes, when the very first time, I just went in there and asked it, "What do you know about X, Y, and Z?" And just looked at what it told me. Now, the thing you need to keep in mind is, if you're in our case, we're doing a lot of instructional content. So it was very easy for me to go in and say, "Tell me what you know about this topic," read the output, and then direct it. A lot of people are using it in a different way. They're actually creating content that isn't really technical in nature. As a project manager, you're going to need to know the type of project, knows a little bit of details about the project to help guide the ChatGPT session. ChatGPT is all about a textual interface. ChatGPT itself is not going to give you back any graphics that you need. It won't generate a diagram in any way. It'll come up, if you ask it for a diagram, it'll say, "I can tell you the steps in that diagram." You'll see in our demo in a little while, by the way. But it won't actually give you this pretty little diagram that has arrows and boxes, or maybe it has computer images in it, whatever. ChatGPT doesn't do that. Other interfaces out there that are AI will do that for you. I've seen you. We've all seen the commercial where they take this picture of these people that looks like they're in one location, and they change a few things, and suddenly, instead of them, standing on their back porch, they're, standing on a cloud somewhere. Yeah, you can do that with AI. Can't do it with Chat GPT, but you can do it with AI. So just you need to, when you're getting your tools together that you're going to use, your different AI tools, you need to understand what they will do, but also what they won't do, so that you find the tool that fits that need the best.
Right. Yeah, there's no doubt everything that you said there we've all experienced it as we began different projects together as well and started to go, oh, is this doing what we actually really need to? But let's kind of dive into this a little bit more because what goes hand in hand together, right, is something we had already talked about, which is this idea that large language model and then Chat GPT. Now, why do both of those kind of really go together? Well, one is because we do need that large language model that actually gathers everything together and gives us a base of knowledge that we have. And then that large language model, as you see right there on the screen, that it can actually be used for a deep learning algorithm that's where it actually begins to recognize and pull things together for us and then gives us the output that we need. Secondly, though, the reason why this is very popular as well is that it doesn't require a large learning curve, right? The way that I used to talk about it was it doesn't require a large ramp up, a gigantic amount of time to be able to use something like ChatGPT. And so, Robin, in the realm of project management, right away, that's where I started seeing it is that a project manager now doesn't have to go and learn another tool. So I remember when I first got started in project management, Robin, I was introduced to Microsoft Project. Now, Robin, if you're familiar with that tool, right, it takes a little bit of time to kind of get ramped up. And then at that point, right, once you kind of have an understanding of that, you still have to enter in all the data and all the information to get some of the stuff out that you actually want to see and do. Well, with a tool like ChatGPT, right, it's built off of the neural network. So that means it has a basic understanding of what you and I kind of think like, but then it also has a massive, gigantic, large language model that it can also analyze from. And then ChatGPT is built to handle what we call that natural language processing, right? Which means it can understand humans saying something to it or typing in questions in the way that humans do into computers, and then the computer can generate an output. Now, unlike the output that I would think would come from a computer, such as if I entered a line of code in, right, and see a response that comes back, what it actually does is actually puts it into human language in responding back to me. Now, whether that human language that it responds back to me in terms of the output is right or wrong, that's something that we still have to validate and check. We can't trust Chat GPT or a large language model at this point to give us exactly the right answer sometimes. That's why everything that you put in there has to be validated. But that is a big part of it. The other part is what we see right here on the screen as well, in the factorama. Gen AI still requires input and training. And this is what Robin was referring to a little bit earlier, which can be a little bit challenging. So, Robin, let me bring you back into this conversation here. At the beginning, right, when you started to actually do this, how frustrating was it for you when you found out that just entering in just another question didn't teach it everything that you wanted it to know and give back to you right away?
Well, I can't initially, I found it quite frustrating because I would say, "I need this from you," and then I may or may not get back what I expected. Another thing that I would try to do is I would try to even direct it in the formatting I wanted it to use, that I wanted it to, have the paragraphs laid out in a certain way. And oftentimes when I would request that initially, I would get what I requested. But as we went along in the conversation, 3 or 4 transactions later, they started slipping from that initial, and I'd have to remind it, "Yeah, you remember I asked for that structure? That I still need it in that structure that I requested." So, there was a lot of frustration. The thing you need to keep in mind is you're just gonna have to teach it,
Hmm.
and you're just gonna have to check and verify that everything it provides to you is in the way you want it. One of the things that I did appreciate, I've been dealing with ChatGPT in particular now for several months, and a lot of the writing that's being provided back to me now sounds more like something that I would have written.
Hmm.
In other words, my original works. And it's because as I tweak things, it's learning the way I write because I'm saying, you know what, can we, move this over here? And oftentimes I'll take a paragraph that it has given me, tweak it a little bit, and say, okay, I want this paragraph to say this, and then I want you to provide me extra information on this. And so they'll use my tweaked paragraph, and it learned from me, and so now it writes a bit more like I do, and so it sounds a lot more my voice. Remember, you're carrying on a conversation. You're asking it questions, you're giving it information, it's giving you back a response, and it's just like a text conversation where you're interacting with this other entity, and it's providing you feedback based on what you're inputting and what you're asking.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing when you start thinking about it that way. But the reason why I mention this, especially for us that are actually doing a little bit of project management, is that it's not just it's not like it knows everything right away, right? There's still a little bit of ramp up time, but the very fact that we can ask it questions that we understand and know, and it can figure most of it out, and then we'd have to tweak it, is a far cry from us having to learn, let's say, like a programming language, or having to actually deep dive into another piece of software that we really have to know from the ground up until we actually understand how it actually generates what it does here. Most of what ChatGPT can do, and the reason why it's so popular, is because you and I can interact with it like we're trying to have a conversation. Now, Robin, you've shown me some of your chats that you've had with ChatGPT, and you really do treat it like a person, right? Like you might say good morning, or you might say please, and do that. And I too do something like that as well. It can kind of get into that informal type of dialogue with it that you think that is actually, almost human.
Well, in my brain, there's another person sitting on the end of this, receiving my input and giving it back to me. Now, I know it's not that case, but in my mind, and a lot of it, like I do say please a lot, and I'm real quick to correct it if it makes a mistake, and it's really quick to respond with an apology. Oh, I'm so sorry. So it does what a human would do in that situation. So yeah, I do oftentimes look at it like it's a human sitting on the other end.
Hmm.
And yeah, I know it's not. But still, for me, I just treat it like I'm having a conversation and we're trying to reach an end goal and we're going to get there together. It's just a matter of how long does it take us to get there?
Yeah, and that's just going to be a part of it, right? Is learning how to do that and making it a tool is what we want to be able to do. That's going to be effective for what we want as well. So it is kind of a key and kind of a big understanding that we definitely want to make sure that we have as we continue to move forward. Now, to actually take a look at this, right? So, we've kind of given you the very basics and the nuts and bolts of using something like a generative AI and why it actually can have an impact on project management here and the most popular tool. But we do want to talk about it in the terms of, well, at least at some point right here, in the terms of project management. And where we decided to focus in on is going to be this idea of documentation in terms of project management. So when it comes down to documentation here, when we started thinking about it, right, overall, we had really four particular, gigantic, top needs that we would have in any type of project, right? A project charter, a business case, status reports here, process documentations. So, Robin, since our focus is on the idea here of project management, right? We said, look, we can't do all of this within the time constraints of this show, but we did want to at least do one of them, which was project documentation as well. So what we want to do, right, is we want to show you a little bit of that output too. So Robin, when Chris essentially started to bring this to you, and he asked you like, "Hey, what can we actually show? What can we do here?" Can you share with us a little bit of your experience and the effort that it took to begin generating something about process documentation, and then we'll take a look at the demo.
So initially, I had had a lot of experience going into this with just generating technical content that would be used in some sort of an instructional manner. In other words, I'm teaching a particular content, whether it's in a classroom, via video, whatever. So it was all about teaching. So when Chris asked me to step over into this project management realm and say, what can AI help me as a project manager do and to be able to be a little more productive as a project manager. Maybe it'll give you a chance to ramp up that project faster. And I honestly, I will just say it here, I had no idea what it was going to be able to do. And I wasn't sure how to even start. Now you're going to say, well, Robin, why didn't you go out and read a bunch of articles? I could have done that. But I wanted to see, as me not knowing its project management knowledge, where we could go. And so initially, what I did is I just went and created a fictitious, in my mind, project that I wanted to do. Now it happens to be have something to do with technical content generation because after all that is what I do, and I already know how a project like that works. So I would better be able to judge if what ChatGPT was giving me was accurate and was complete. So what I did is I initially fed into it a premise about a project, and I told it the process that the content generation would go to, about how it would start with an author and then it has to be technically reviewed and so forth and so on. So in feeding that process to it, I would see then, does it even understand what my project is doing and the process it's going to have occur as part of that project execution? What's my team members going to be doing, and what team members do I need? So that's kind of where I started from. And I didn't go very deep into it because I'm just trying to demo to you guys an easy way that it started without me even having to do a ton of even teaching of it. So that was the premise. I had a project that I wanted to start from. I knew what that project wanted to do, and I already had in my head the process that in executing the project that we were going to have to go through to create my content.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look at what it is that you did generate here, and then you can probably just either voice over or talk over as we show you what actually happened. So a few days ago, Robin did actually use ChatGPT here and begin GPT. I don't know why I said B, ChatGPT to actually help us to generate some of the things that she was talking about. And here are the surprising, or some of the results here that I think that, if I remember right, Robin said that she also found surprising as well. So there it is, Robin, that you actually began with the simple statement, I want to work on some project management documents for an upcoming project. Can you help me with this? And there it is. Certainly, project management documentation plays a crucial role. And from that point, it began to define what those things were and even giving a purpose and the key components that are found inside of these different pieces of documentation. So that's where she
And
began.
if
Mhm.
and if you're a project manager, you're going to look at this if you've had any kind of experience and you're going to go, "Oh, it understands not only the purpose of these documents, but the components that need to go into it. And I don't have to teach it what a project charter is and what components are in a project charter or any of the other things. When I mention the term project charter in a later transaction, if I wanted to, I'm not going to have to worry about in my brain, does AI even know what a project charter does and what is even in it? That told me that it did. And like I said, all I did was, hey, can you help me?
Yep.
And it told me all of this. And this was only, you can see, this is not all of the project documentation that you're going to need, but it's a great start. And it tells me if you need help with details or templates, that very last sentence, or templates for any specific document, let me know. So it even offered to provide me some templates for those documents that it's talked about.
Yeah.
Now,
Pretty
as you
neat.
can see, Ronnie, I had another transaction.
Yep. So as a part of this project, I need to define the process for the development of project deliverables. Can you create a process diagram or give me the development, or if I give you the development steps? And here, a fairly simple answer, but you do see that at the end, as it gave a simple answer back, it did also say, hey, provide me with the development steps and I'll help you structure the process diagram format too. So very neat in what it actually says it will do. And even showed you can use anything for diagramming and gives you some of the tools, Visio, Lucidchart, Draw.io to actually create the visual representation. And then it says, hey, if you actually need to do something, here it is. They'll actually help you with the structure of it. So I found that to be very interesting that it was actually saying, hey, not only can I do that, I can help you to begin. And here's some of the tools you may want to use to do that as well. Let's see. Oh, Robin actually gave it a little bit of a deeper dive here as well. As you can see, the first SME author writes content for each deliverable based on the content outline. And she continues to actually chain all of this together. Now, Robin, I want to ask you this because we're going to actually see that not only did it take you time to write this, but when it comes down to the answer, Robin, did it really take the AI any real amount of time to generate the content that it actually outputted?
Now, I will say this. I did it in an afternoon.
Yep.
Depending on what time zone where you live, you'll find in when you're in an AI that it slows down at certain parts of the day. It took it a few minutes to generate all of this,
Hmm.
but I did do it in the afternoon. For as a general rule, for me, ChatGPT slows down in the afternoons considerably, and when I'm in there in the mornings, it's zipping along. But still, a few minutes to generate all of that. Do you know how long it would have taken me
Yeah.
to type all of that information by myself?
Yeah.
A lot longer. It increases your productivity, people. Productivity increases the biggest benefit you're going to be getting out of this.
Yeah. And so as we go on through this, right, you can actually see where this is essentially the process that Robin took and it just continued on to actually identify what was needed. And then it gave responsibilities and qualifications. So even without asking, Robin instead, I need help in identifying the team members. And it still went on to give you the author, the responsibilities, the skills and qualifications, which I cannot say. And it went on and defined that without us even having to ask because of the pattern that Robin began to set with the questions that now it actually was responding to the way that she was thinking and having to do as well. And so you can see that it goes on and she does the same thing with stakeholders. You name it, it actually continues on and provides more and more information. And so, Robin, if we continue to feed in more and more information, we are really teaching it, right?
Yes. One of the things that you'll note here when I asked it about stakeholder, well, first of all, when I asked it about team members, it identified in my list a couple of team members. One of the things it threw out at me is a graphic designer. I had not initially mentioned a graphic designer as any part of my process. Now, logically, we would have needed a graphic designer. You're going to need a graphic designer to design the graphics that you're going to use in the classroom. But it said you might also consider adding a graphic designer, and then you've got this learning and development specialist, which is technically a learning and development specialist is something like an instructional designer, somebody that really understands instructional design. So it thought of two roles that I had not really included as part of my process, and made a suggestion of, hey, this is the responsibilities I feel like those roles would have, and here's the skills they're going to need in order to best provide you what you need for your project. Now, when I got down into the stakeholders, what I also liked, and that's in my next transaction, was when it told me some of the stakeholders that it felt like I was going to have, it told me their interest and their influence that they would have on the project. Now, for those of you that are project managers, you know that interest and influence is something that is important to kind of know, because the interest that someone is going to have on a project and the influence they have on that project will affect the project in a great way. And so, as a project manager, oftentimes when you're documenting those stakeholders, you're going to document their interest and their influence, because you want to know about that ahead of time so that you can know who you need to spend more time with, because they may have a lot more influence. And so, you want to make sure that you fully understand their needs. Now, the next thing that I did is, Ronnie, I did some preliminary risk
Yep,
identification. Now,
I
risks
see
are
that.
a big thing for a project,
Yeah.
and look what it put there.
Yeah, it's amazing that it
It,
not only actually gave you the risk, even though that's all you asked for, but its potential impact as well. So another thing that it filled in, because of the way that Robin was able to train it to actually say, provide more, provide a fuller detail to give me this. So it is kind of amazing that it did that without her having to specify every aspect of what needed to actually help here. So when you start taking a look, you can see where it can do exactly what Robin is talking about. And then she just continued on for that entire project. Now, here's the point that we also want to make sure that we make too, right? It shouldn't replace the work that you have to do. It is about helping you to speed up. So we don't want it actually replacing human work. What we want to do is actually to be more and more efficient too. All right, so Robin, it has now come to that point in time where we are, I think, ready to actually have some questions. You ready to handle some questions?
I think so. What about
Yeah.
you, Ronnie? They
Yeah.
may actually have a question for you.
It sounds actually pretty good here as we get started. So the first one is, how can I show proficiency in using AI uh, for project managers to employers? How can I show proficiency in using AI for PMs to employers?
So my suggestion would be, you can go in and start, when you go in and start a chat session, all of my chat sessions that I've started are named for particular projects. Or particular content that I'm generating, whatever it may be. And you're going to, first of all, going to have to go in and play with it. You're going to have to see. But the neat thing about it is, just as Ronnie opened my session, was able to show you my history, at any point, most of these AI models have a share option where you can share your ChatGPT session with someone else. Now, in ChatGPT, when you share a session, you're giving them the history up to the point where you shared it. If they were to go in and open it and start asking it questions, they are then in their own session, but with your history. So they wouldn't have to train it on everything that you had trained it on, but they would need to progress the training on and ask questions further. However, both of your sessions at that point are considered separate, because you shared your history. You didn't actually, you're not in the same session. Now, you could probably come up with a model where you're sharing the same session from for all time, I guess you could say. But the way we did it here is, I spent some time in ChatGPT training it on maybe Security Plus topics. And then I had an instructional designer that also needed to start working with some Security Plus topics. So I shared that session with the instructional designer. The instructional designer was then, from that point forward, able to take their session in whatever direction they wanted to take it, and I was able to keep my session like I wanted it and go in the direction I needed. So like I said, my training was able to help the instructional designer, in that they didn't have to loop back and start from scratch. They could start from the point at which I had trained it.
Yeah.
My
So,
thing, one,
go ahead.
I do want to say here, in doing it, when you're sharing those sessions, and if you're trying to prove to management its proficiency, try to find some of those golden nuggets to kind of zoom in on. Your session might have 65 different topics that you're talking about, but two or three of them are really, really good. Focus in on those really, really good points to management and let them see, look what it provided me. And I was able to then take what it provided me and show them the end result of what you produced. Say, I took what they provided, but then I was able to totally give you a quality product and in a much shorter time period.
Yeah, I think from my point of view as well. So Robin gave us a great answer there, but I would also say show the prompts that you're using to get the answer that you are looking for. So it shows that you have that ability and that knowledge and that proficiency that you've been working inside of some type of AI, especially if it's Chat GPT, that you know how to write a good prompt and one that gives you the information that you need. That's probably another aspect of you being able to do that. All right. So another question, which is actually a very generic question, but a good one, is paying for ChatGPT really worth it when it comes down to what we actually want here? And that was actually from Robert. I forgot to mention the earlier one. That was from Albert B from YouTube. This is Robert S from LinkedIn as well. So is it actually really worth it? Well, what Robin just mentioned, that ability to share the history or that chat session that you've actually generated doesn't tend to, or does it? Robin, have you been able to share that from a free account? I can't remember. I know that's in the
Now, I haven't, my account's paid.
yeah.
So I do know that originally, when I had an unpaid account, I was unable to
Yeah.
share that chat history. And that was one of the reasons why I was like, oh, I need to upgrade
Yeah.
because I want to share this session. I've already trained them on Security Plus, and I don't want them to have to start from scratch.
Right.
When you start from scratch and you've already got that model just working just like you need, and it has all the knowledge it needs, you don't want someone else who's going to be doing the same thing in your company to have to start from scratch again. You can then share that session. They've got your history. They can read through it and say, oh, Robin's already covered all of these attacks and all of these threats and all of these different mitigation techniques. So I don't have to cover all of that. ChatGPT already understands it.
Excellent. Yeah, that's what I would say as well. The paid account is worth it, especially if you're going to be doing something like that, where you need to be able to share that history. 100% worth it, especially if you're working among team with that. Now, another question then from Herbert from YouTube: What what is the quality difference between ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 and ChatGPT 4? Now, when it comes down to the quality difference here, it's definitely not about speed, right? It is about the neural engine that is behind the background of everything. Depending on who you ask, everybody will probably pick one or the other that's a favorite. ChatGPT 4, the only way that you actually be able to know a difference, right, is to ask the exact same questions in both of them and see if it actually really generates something that's much better or not as good as well. So, from my standpoint, I really do enjoy using ChatGPT for more, but it's not that the ChatGPT 3.5 that I really saw that there was that much of a difference. But it depends on what you're really asking and what you're actually needing it to do. So, Robin, do you have a particular preference, or have you seen kind of like, hey, it seems to have actually worked just fine either way?
Yeah, initially when I started, ChatGPT 4 wasn't out.
Hmm.
So a lot of my initial sessions were in chat in 3.5. And of course, I have deadlines, and
Yeah.
so I don't have time to run those same things. Let's go, oh, let me ask that same question that I asked in 3.5 and 4.0. I will say this, I wasn't unhappy with what 3.5 gave me.
Hmm.
Um, I have since started doing things in 4.0. One of the things that I have noticed is I didn't have to do some of my repeating of
Yep.
requests with 4. It's almost like it learned a little better than perhaps it than 3.5 did. In other words, when I provided it, hey, I needed something to do X, I didn't have to repeat that request in 4 like I did in 3.5. It seems like in 3.5, when you get several transactions in, it starts thinking it knows better than you, and you still have to go back and say, no, 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 I still need my structure the way I requested. So that's the only real difference that I've seen so far. Now, again, like I said, not done any side by side asking it the same question. I think I might try to convince my boss to let me spend maybe a half a day doing that just to see what the output was, because now it's piqued my interest. Is it really that much of a difference?
Yeah, it's just really based on the way that ChatGPT went from, the development of it. ChatGPT 4 was done on a little bit of a different development model. So I'm trying to think about how you'd quantify or qualify that in terms of quality, right? But I think you'd see it depending on what it is that you're really asking it to do, is where you'd see that. So I don't know if there's a real easy qualification, but in general, most people say ChatGPT 4 is pretty much the way to go. But I think if you are, you know, doing what you need to do and it's sufficient for your work, is probably going to be fine for what you actually need as well. All right, so next question here that we actually have is going to be Olden from Zoom. I was trying to make sure I actually said that right. Can I don't know why I keep not being able to say it. Chat GPT create a project schedule. So has that been something that we tried to do, or has that you haven't gotten to that
So
point, have you?
I haven't, and it's mostly because a schedule is graphical.
Yeah.
ChatGPT isn't really a graphical interface,
Hmm.
it's a textual interface. You saw I fed in my process and it told me I can't give you a diagram. Here's where you're going to go to get that diagram. However, I can give you the steps that you
Right.
want to feed into whatever tool you use to create your diagram. So I haven't tried it. I don't know if it can do it, but the project management person in me says, I don't know how much it would be able to help because schedules are mostly graphical.
Yeah.
However, there are other AIs out there that can do it.
I think that that's the point to make, right? If we don't see that ability inside of ChatGPT to do it, there are those other AI tools that are out there that you might be able to actually plug in. And I would just do a simple search in your favorite web browser to actually do something like AI for project management, and you'll probably see several of those as you actually start to move forward. So those are a little bit more custom, and and they're actually probably really limited around a lot of the project management language too. Whereas large language models, there's a ton of information that comes in from every direction. So that might actually produce for you even a better model depending on the way that they've chose to do that. We have another question that's also out there from us from Portia from Zoom here. Is there a specific AI tool software plugin that will convert project charter information from Chat GPT paragraph form into a slide deck, or I can't see the rest of,
It
or
says,
visual
or
output?
a visual output.
Yeah, probably not the visual output side. So if you're looking for something like a Gantt chart, ChatGPT is probably not going to do that. But there are probably specific AIs that, if they have those plugins, that will probably generate that for you. I'm not super familiar with any of those right now. Our primary tool here was just really taking a look at one, which was going to be ChatGPT and what it could actually do for us, since that's the most popular model that's out there. Yeah.
And I will say this, every reply it gives back to you, as far as ChatGPT goes, there's this wonderful little button. You click copy, this one little button, and it copies all of that particular transaction for you that you can paste anywhere. So I don't know that ChatGPT would be the best place to do most of this, but I'm sure everybody's getting on the AI bandwagon and they want to produce a new tool that helps you be more efficient and provide you with what you need. So I'm sure there's something out there. Again, my primary thing that I've been playing with is ChatGPT because I'm just crunching out content and instructional material, but it's out there, guys. You've just got to find it. And look, ask ChatGPT if it's out there. If
Mhm.
you remember in one of my things, it did point me to Microsoft Visio and a few other tools to create a diagram. So it probably knows about it.
Yeah. All right. Interesting question here, which is actually a good one. Arnold from Zoom asks, what are the security and privacy concerns from a business org perspective? you don't want to be using the free one if you're actually going to be doing this for a business, especially if you're going to be entering in some type of information. You do not want it to actually be out there at all. You want to at least have some type of authentication. In a business perspective, probably a better way for you to go to ensure a little bit more in terms of privacy and security is to get your API key generated and make sure it's actually locked down that way as well. So there is a model with ChatGPT that can give you access, and it generates an API key for you that will actually be uh, well, unique if nothing else, right? That will actually lock that a little bit more in for you. So don't use the free one is what I would say if you actually do have those concerns, overall. So right now, in terms of large accounts, that's what you'll actually have to do. There is no easier way. I mean, I guess you could share a single account, but it will require, of course, some type of authentication for you to do that. So for us, we actually use one that actually connects to open. Why can I remember what Open API or Open AI? It's API out there, and that's the way that we actually end up using it too. Uh,
Another thing that we also do on the backside of producing content is I do introduce this into a plagiarism checker, such as Grammarly or some other tool that you may use, so that you can make sure you're not infringing on anybody else's copyrighted material out there. So that's another thing is you want to provide the protection on the front end for your session and to ensure security and privacy, but on the back end, you also want to make sure that if you're producing content, that you're not uh, violating any copyright laws or any of the things like that. So you don't need to just think about it on the front end. You've got to think about it on the back end too, particularly if you're generating instructional material or material that may be borrowing the learning from somewhere else.
all right, our final question from Monty from Zoom: does ChatGPT constantly update or on a nonstop basis? What is the source population that it uses to update? So when we start talking about its updating, it's not constant overall. And I think Robin mentioned it earlier is that you do end up seeing usually at the bottom of the screen where it tells you this information is up to date as of this date. And I think, that's pretty much what you actually have to generate based on is that if you see things that have updated and have updated, but yet it's not appearing inside of Chat GPT, that's pretty much what you'll see. They don't really seem to announce like it's going to update every 6 months or every 3 weeks or whatever it is. It just tends to actually come whenever it actually needs to happen based on, I'm assuming, the amount of information that they actually end up getting. So the source of population is probably everything that it actually can scrape from whatever source that it actually wants to be able to do that. Now, if you're saying, hey, that's too much, no doubt that there's a ton that's out there. This is why using something probably more specific towards project management and doing more of a smaller language model, right, or a more localized language model is probably something that will give you super specific results as to what you actually need instead of one based off of a gigantic large language model as well. So that's probably what you actually end up seeing and dealing with when it comes down to that result in terms of what its update is going to be. So the easiest way, of course, is just to check it out at the bottom of the screen as you actually go to ChatGPT, and it'll actually tell you when it's last updated. Robin, I can't remember. I think it updated recently, though, probably in the last 6 months or so, if I remember right.
Yeah, but I don't believe. Yeah, if I remember correctly, what I read about it, it wasn't. It updated about 6 months ago, but it
Yeah,
wasn't like up to that exact
yeah.
date. It was like still a year old or something. Now, I will also tell you, I've done some looks in some research into some other AI models that are out there. Watson, in particular, if it's quite expensive, but you can in Watson lock in your like proprietary data for your company and have AI that works just with the data within your company, which for some large corporations out there probably would be very vast. And with Watson, it does provide a means whereby you're just working with your data and no one can see into your data. And like I said, you're not really working outside of that data. So ChatGPT doesn't update regularly as far as always updating. It's more of a scheduled thing. And even when it updates, it isn't updating to the date of the update. It's usually about, I want to say, a year or two behind, is what I seem to remember being said somewhere in an article. But it's still not bad, and you can teach it. Security Plus has a new version. It's the 701 version, and ChatGPT did not understand what the 701 version was. I was able to teach it what the 701 version, and then I was able to get content based on what I taught it. So it's not a totally lost cause if it's not in the database. You just kind of may have to tweak it a little more and feed in a little more information.
All right. Well, that will go ahead and wrap it up for us here as we actually do wind down this particular webinar. But we don't want to leave you hanging, right? If you actually do want more content like this, as well as more instructional content, take a look and generate a Webinar 30 code that you can use for 30% off right here at ACI Learning. So, mentioning that and signing off for Robin Abernathy and myself, everybody have a great day.